Будемо починати, да? Ви мене чуєте?
Так, так.
Добре. Jean-Pierre, je vais commencer, ça va? S'il y a ceux qui nous rejoignent, ils vont nous rejoindre.
Avec plaisir.
Дорогі наші студенти і магістри, які будуть слухати лекції пана Філью в рамках програми політичних студій, курсу політичної антропології, вибачте, в магістеріумі, і ті, хто є нашими бакалаврами. Ми дуже раді вітати сьогодні професора Інституту політичних студій в місті Париж, Паризького інституту політичних студій Жана-П'єра Філью. Ви всі мали матеріали для того, щоб ознайомитись з бібліографією і життєвим шляхом, професійним шляхом нашого гостя. Я буквально декілька слів лише скажу, і пан Філью розпочне свою лекцію. Жан-П'єр Філью – відомий французький політолог, дипломат. Він є кавалером ордена Почесного легіону, викладає в Інституті політичних досліджень в Парижі, але він мав також і можливість викладати в американських університетах. І також впродовж свого життя він багато після захисту докторської дисертації працював в амбасадах Франції, в країнах Близького Сходу і був радником по культурі в посольствах Франції в Сирії, Тунісі та Іорданії. Теми наукових досліджень пана Філью – це Близький Схід в міжнародних відносинах, це новітня історія Близького Сходу, політичні та соціальні зміни в країнах Близького Сходу. Щодо його викладання в Інституті політичних досліджень, то він викладає в магістерських програмах. І, зокрема, теми його магістерських курсів – це вступ до історії Близького Сходу з 395 року до наших днів. Близький Схід – це друга тема. Близький Схід – історія Близького Сходу з 1798 року по наш час. І дуже цікава для нас тема, третя тема його викладань – це конфлікти та мирні перемовини на Близькому Сході. Тепер я надаю слово, щоб не забирати час, надаю слово пану Філью. Je vous passe la parole, cher Jean-Pierre, donc allez-y. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Alors, hop. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you for those who are online. I hope you hear me well. Is it okay? You hear me well? Okay, it's fine?
Yes,
Wherever you are. Thank you so much. Welcome. So thank you very much, Professor Golichenko, dear Tatiana, for this kind introduction. Thank you so much, dear Larissa Shovniuk, for being here and for welcoming me yesterday on my first day on campus, for showing me the various dimension, explaining me all of the riches of this national institution. It's for me a great honor, a privilege for being here. And apart from the teaching I will deliver today, next Wednesday, the following Wednesday, until 22nd February, each time probably in the same classroom, I wanted to deliver also a message of solidarity from my institution, Sciences Po, the student body, the faculty, because we are all very, very involved with the tragedy you live, and we are all very, very supportive of your resistance, your collective and individual resistance, because we know, even so we are so far away from the battlefield, how tough it might be for you, your families, your dear ones. So it's also a show of solidarity. And as you know, some 40 of your fellow students have already been welcomed in Sciences Po, but in order for them to complete their studies here at this university, because it's basically being here, keeping your roots here, studying here, that will make you and your country stronger to face this ruthless invasion. So what I will do in those 4 classes is to present how the Middle East has been, in fact, the cradle where Vladimir Putin has forged and tested the techniques, the terror techniques, the war techniques is now using against your country since last February, since nearly a year. Yeah? So did you all receive my syllabus? You have it? So I made it especially for you. Some of you maybe attended the lecture I give with Dr. Golichenko at the invitation of Dr. Shabana last December. If you can just raise your hand for me to know who attended this lecture. No? Oh, it's fine. You can just check the link and to see what it was all about. And anyway, in this lecture I give, it was like, you know, paving the ground for the course I will be delivering in 4 classes, the first one being today. Is that clear? So today we will study how the Assad regime and the Putin regime are intimately linked, not only through military alliance, not only for strategic reasons, but because, as I put it with some kind of a sad irony, one could speak about Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin. It's very important to have this in mind because too many decision makers, diplomats, opinion leaders in the West believed that Vladimir Putin was part of the European mentality, that he was somebody you could deal with, somebody you could negotiate with, while somebody like Bashar al-Assad was a pariah, was a war criminal, that he had to be boycotted. And in fact, as I will present you during this first class, and of course I will leave you, whether online or now in the room, time to ask questions. I will have 3 parts in this lecture, and after the end of each part, I will give room. I know that in the beginning, you will be a little bit shy, you weren't there, but after the second part, probably you will like more to interact with me, and after the third part, you will be at ease anyway, I hope so. So the first class will be about that. As you saw in the syllabus, the second class will be how there was this laboratory in Syria, and you can check. I put it in the resources. There is a video that is subtitled in English that is very useful to explain not only the similarities, but also how literally Syria was used as a testing ground for what you suffer today in Ukraine. We'll speak about the Russian-Iranian alliance, and then we will end up the 4th class with how the Middle East changed through the very process of this all-out offensive against Ukraine, and how those changes in the Middle East could affect what you live on a daily basis. It's not abstract, it's very concrete, unfortunately, and I hope one day, fortunately. So, is it okay? Is it clear? So, Vladimir, do I speak loud enough? Because as a former diplomat, I've been diplomat for nearly 20 years, you know that diplomats tend to speak very low. And you know why diplomats tend to speak very low? People think it's because they are peaceful. No, it's because when you speak very low, people lose track of what they think because they focus on trying to get what you say. And in fact, it's a diplomatic trick to force, you know, your counterpart to come to your intellectual field because you speak very low. Since I don't try and do that, I will try and speak on a normal, with a normal level of voice. So, Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin. You have three reasons why I can use this parallel. And it's, as I told you, crucial to understand that they share the same world vision. Putin is 100 times closer to Bashar al-Assad than to any leader in the West or in Europe, contrary to the misconception that many of them nurtured. So first, they both inherited power. Second, they were both bred into the political police culture, the intelligence. I don't think it's very intelligent, and they have literally an alternative reality vision of mind. And the third thing is that both of them are ruling a mafia system. And ruling a mafia system is quite a challenge. And both of them manage to rule a mafia system because they are ruthless. So the first part, how they both inherited. You know probably better than me the political life of Vladimir Putin. I won't elaborate too much on that. But there is something striking about him that is in parallel with what we can say about Bashar al-Assad, is that he inherited power. You know, most of world leaders have to go through a whole process before reaching the top. You know, Joe Biden entered political life in the Senate in 1972. And it took him 50 years, approximately, before being elected. Vladimir Putin, he went practically to the top in a record time, because he was inheriting the power. He was the designated heir of President Yeltsin, that, as you know, was the first elected president of the Russian Federation after the end of the Soviet Union. So why did he become the heir? He was not the most talented, he was not the most powerful, but he was probably the most ruthless. You all know the Darwinian theory, how the fittest survive. You have to understand that in this kind of regime, it's usually the most ruthless that will come to the top, because he was ruthless enough to eliminate his own comrades, to do anything in cold blood in order to achieve absolute power. So of course, you know that there was already the terror dimension with the bombings that occurred in Moscow and in other places that were blamed on the Chechen, that became a pretext for the Second Chechen War. And this war was the background on which Vladimir Putin became the heir. But the most important thing is that Yeltsin designated it. Why? Because, as you know, Yeltsin had a lot of problems, not only with alcohol, and he knew that he couldn't prevail longer at the top. So he needed somebody to safeguard his regime and to protect his immunity. Immunity, impunity is key to this kind of regime, because they know better than us all the crimes they did. So they know that if there is no immunity and impunity, they could end up in jail somewhere. And after everything they did, they don't want that at all. So Yeltsin designated the leader of the FSB, and we'll come to that, the leader of the intelligence service, Vladimir Putin, who had very little previous experience of power before. But his main asset when it comes to Yeltsin was that he was able to safeguard his personal immunity and his family immunity. Family immunity is crucial, which is why now the sanctions are targeting not only the people who are connected with the Kremlin, but also their families, not because we don't have family feeling, but because we know that it's a family system. I will come to that when I speak about the mafia. Okay? So he was designated as his heir. He became, as you remember, prime minister by interim, president by interim in the first days of 2000, and eventually was elected in May 2000 by 52.5% officially. But he had been to the top, and he remained in power ever since, no matter what Mr. Medvedev, that now became, you know, the most rabid voice against Ukraine in the so-called political establishment, no matter what Medvedev did when officially Putin was prime minister. In fact, you know, he remained in power for the last 2 decades. Okay. For Bashar al-Assad, in one way or another, it was more simple. He was the son of a president, Hafez al-Assad, who had been ruling with absolute power Syria since 1970. And in order to preserve this power, to preserve the impunity, to preserve the immunity, Hafez al-Assad very early on had decided to create the first dictatorial dynasty of republican nature in the Middle East. In fact, if we want to find a precedent to that, we have to go to North Korea, where you had now already 3 generations of leaders. You have to realize that now in Syria, Bashar al-Assad is preparing his own son, who is now your age, Hafez al-Assad, called after his own father, to be the next president. So the transmission of power is crucial. So Bashar al-Assad was not supposed to become the president of Syria. It was another brother, Bassel, who was groomed to become the president, but Bassel al-Assad killed himself in a car accident in 1994. So Hafez al-Assad brought back Bashar al-Assad from England, where he was studying ophthalmology. So everybody called him doctor. He studied 1 year of ophthalmology, so you imagine the extent of his medical expertise, but by Assad standard, he's a doctor. Anyway, he came back. At that time, I was deputy chief of mission in Syria, and because France and Syria had excellent bilateral relations, I could meet him. And when I was asked by my ministry what would happen after the demise, the death of Hafez al-Assad, I answered back, Bashar al-Assad would be the next president, and he will be worse than his father. Because usually people tend to believe, oh, he's younger, so he's nicer. Why? You know, he's younger, but he learned a lot. And what is more important, he inherited power. Like Putin, we will come back to that. When you inherit power, the power is yours. You didn't fight to get it. You considered that is by God's will, and certainly not by people's will, that you have the power. And you are ready to go all the way to fight anybody that could challenge this absolute power. which is exactly what happened with Bashar al-Assad. He was designated, so that means that he inherited Syria. Not only power, he inherited Syria. He inherited absolute control over the Syrian women and men. Same with Putin. The moment he was at the top, he inherited Russia. And since you have this inheritance, since you didn't go through a political process, since you didn't go through that, then of course anybody who dares to say that maybe Syria doesn't belong to you, maybe Russia doesn't belong to you, this is an enemy, this is an existential threat. You have to understand that for this kind of leaders, there is no legitimate opposition. Of course, if a country like Ukraine dares to resist Russia, it has to be crushed the way any opposition inside Russia is to be crushed. You understand? It's very crucial to understand that this inheriting, this legacy process loads those very regimes with a violence that cannot be understood if we don't go through those very roots. Is that clear? Do you have questions about that? You have, don't be shy. You can ask any questions, because when it comes to Syria, maybe I didn't go through the whole process and I didn't explain everything. Feel free to ask a question. No, it's okay. So Yeltsin, when he transferred power to Putin, he negotiated his personal and family immunity. But to prove to the whole world, and especially to the ruling class, that he was now the only leader in charge of Russia, very quickly Putin struck at people who were close to Yeltsin, but were not protected by the legacy pact. That was a way to show, now I am defining the rule of the game. I inherited power, I will protect Yeltsin and his family, but for the rest, I have absolute arbitrary authority. So that, and of course, because it was 2000, now 2023, we know the truth about this character, but in the beginning, you know, he wanted to give signs, to send signs to the world that he was respecting the new Russia. 52.5, this is perfect, 52.5%. I'm not sure that he got 52.5% of the vote, but 52.5 fits the so-called democratic standard. In Syria, they didn't have this kind of elegance. There was only one candidate, Bashar al-Assad, and he was elected with 99.7%. You know, and I know Syrians who said, "Ooh, freedom is progressive," because his father had been elected last time with 99.8%. So we are moving forward. I say, yes, we're moving forward. According to my calculation, in 2152, we will have a free and fair election in Syria by this standard. No, it's fine, it's fine. But you have also to understand that in this regime, they don't, you know, they are not shy of anything. They can go through the rudest comedy or tragedy, if I may say. In the constitution, because Hafez al-Assad, so Assad Senior, died too early. He thought he would die a little bit later. You know. So he died too early. So in the constitution, the president was supposed to be 40 years old. That was the minimum age. But Bashar al-Assad was 35 and a half. So they convened the parliament, and by you know, raising hands, they changed the constitution to downgrade the age to 35. Of course, they could have downgraded to 35.5, but that would have been a little bit too much. So they said 35. And then he was the only one who ran for election. And then he became the leader of the party, the ruling party, Baath Party. So the Baath Party was like the Communist Party during the Soviet Union. It was supposed to be the one and only party. And then they had, like in the communist system, you know, official opposition, the National Front, Patriotic Front. It was the same in Syria. No? So he became the leader of the Baath Party. I think he never attended a meeting of the Baath Party in his life, but he became the Secretary General. And of course, he became the General Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. I think I know more about military than him, but that's not the problem. In this kind of regime, the only issue is who's going to be at the top. Because if you have the top, you'll have many people to kill and die for you. You don't have to be a genius in military. People will do the job or will not do the job, but you won't have to do it yourself. No? So again, if I make this parallel, it's because you have to understand that very often Syria, through its extreme, absence of total lack of decency, reveals also the truth of the Russian regime. Because in Syria, they don't try to play by any European games. It's clear. But the Russian system is not that far, and we will see why. So that's the first dimension. The second dimension that is maybe even more revealing is the fact that both Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad comes from the so-called intelligence community. So as I told you, it's an oxymoron. It's not so much a community because they all hate each other and they all want to kill each other. It's a permanent power struggle, and they really want to, as I told you, it's the winners takes all, the fittest survives only. And it's not very intelligent, despite the intelligence, because they have very limited focus, and the focus boils down to killed in order not to be killed. It's as simple as that. Don't need to go through a lot of dissertation. Kill, otherwise you'll be killed. So, as you all know, Vladimir Putin, he loved so much this kind of world that he joined it very early. People who join this kind of world very early, I know some of them. Okay, maybe I can have a drink or maybe even a dinner with them. I will test if it's not poison before. But they always, because it's an underworld. It's another world. So you heard about the way Putin is abusing their country. I won't even use the word he's using against you because it's horrendous. But there is a strong possibility that he believes them. Because he lives in a parallel reality. He lives in an alternative reality. And this alternative reality can be understood only through the so-called intelligence community. So Putin entered very early on this world and this career. And as you know, he was posted in Dresden, in what was then East Germany, the so-called Democratic Republic, German Democratic Republic, which was not democratic and which was more pro-Soviet than German. And he was there, so imagine the power of somebody from this kind of KGB-like institution, the power in a brother or sister country. And he saw all this collapse. That was, and all this why? Because of people who tore down the Berlin Wall, people who demonstrated, people who claim people's power. So not only was he already trained not to believe anything like that, but now he had a personal hatred for this kind of movement. Because if those movements goes, then his whole world is threatened. So this is a second kind of existential threat. There is a threat to the power that he inherited from Yeltsin, but there is a threat to his own world that is built on the idea that the real power is secret power. Is not a power that you can discuss, that you can display. It's the power of the political police, intelligence communities that is acting behind the curtains. Okay? And this is through it that he went up to the top. Maybe one day my fellow historians will know through the archives, the same way that when the KGB and the Communist Party archives and the Stasi in East Germany, and when those archives were opened, then suddenly we discovered that everything we thought was extreme was far from the reality, that it was far worse. That they were really manipulating, they were creating this new parallel reality. And that they believed it. And that they believed it had to be protected at all costs. And of course, when it comes to Putin's rising to the top, you have the key of those secret services and double agents using Chechen or supposedly Chechen terrorists in order to trigger the war that will bring Putin to power. And we'll come to that in the last point about the war economy. Those leaders are feeding on war. Not only they are not shying away from war, but war is key to their survival and prosperity. So, Bashar al-Assad, you have to understand that in Syria, even more than in Russia, you have the official power and the real power. In Syria, you have government, you have ministers, you have members of parliaments, you have all this is meaningless because the real power is the so-called mukhabarat. Mukhabarat means intelligence, and those security, or I would say insecurity services, are the ones who are really ruling the country. When you want to get anything, when you want to send your child to university, when you want to get an export license, when you want to expand your business, when you want to open this, you have to have a protector from the so-called mukhabarat or security services. And they called it partnership, musharaka. So they could come to anybody and say, oh, you have a nice factory, you have a nice shop. I will be happy with 49%. You can keep 51. But I have 49% and let's say 50% of the benefits. And so, like in Russia, the FSB, former KGB networks, are not limited to the so-called security. They extend their networks in the whole society. And it is through the partnership with this or that that they can prosper. So again, in Syria, it's worse, it's more extreme, but it is the same logic that is shedding a very revealing light on the truth of the Putin system. So in this kind, I met people from those, I met top leaders, not from the Russian intelligence, but from the Syrian intelligence. And it's fascinating to see that everything for them is a plot. Everything is a plot. They don't believe that you want something, individually, collectively, you want to achieve it. In order to achieve it, you have a party or a union or association. In order to protest, you make a meeting. For them, this doesn't exist. There's only a plot. And since they rule the system this way, they do believe that there is a foreign plot that is, in fact, the real energy behind anything happening. And Putin and Assad became absolutely obsessed with color revolution. For them, color revolution are no expression of the will of the people. They are a plot from the CIA, they are a plot from NATO, they are a plot from the Mossad when it comes to Syria, and both of them suffered from this kind of popular uprising, and they decided very early on that they will never let it happen again. In 2004, as you know better than me, you had the Orange Revolution here in Ukraine. That was really a traumatic experience for Putin. And from then on, he started to build this obsession that it's not about the Ukrainian people, it's not about their will to have a decent government, it's all about CIA, NATO, blah, blah. He probably believes it. In Syria, in 2005, so a few months after your Orange Revolution, you had the so-called Cedar Revolution, because cedar is a tree that is a symbol of Lebanon. Syria had been occupying, well, not Syria, the Assad regime had been occupying Lebanon for the previous 3 decades. They came in at the request of the then Lebanese government in 1976, and they never moved. They occupied the country. And they occupied it and they plundered it very systematically. The same way in the Soviet system, there was a systematic network of plundering, of racketeering, of corruption that was connected to the very power logic of the ruling clique in Moscow. So Syria had to withdraw from Lebanon after 3 decades of occupation, and of course they blamed it on a foreign plot. The French, the Americans, the Israelis, they couldn't accept that there were mass demonstrations in Beirut, the same way the Kremlin never accepted that mass demonstration in Kiev and in other Ukrainian cities triggered the Orange Revolution. So that was the same traumatic experience for both of them. And of course, this was, as you know, in Syria, intensified after the so-called Arab Spring, which is in fact a democratic uprising. I don't use the word Arab Spring too much. I don't like it too much because spring means that there is a season, and when the season is over, then everything is over. In fact, we're talking both in Ukraine and in the Middle East with long-term movements over 1 generation to promote individual and collective emancipation. So the so-called Arab Spring in Syria started in March 2011 and was inspired by the fact that popular uprising in Tunisia, in Egypt, had in a few weeks forced the local dictators to step down, Ben Ali in Tunisia and Mubarak in Egypt. And in Mubarak, you know, Maidan means also square in Arabic. You know, it's a shared, it's one of the few shared words between Ukrainian and Arabic. So the whole idea was to occupy a central square in order to promote a collective demand for freedom and self-determination. This is what happened successfully in Tunisia and Egypt, but in Syria, immediately on the very first day, Bashar al-Assad said, there is no peaceful protest, there are only terrorists, and I will fight them as terrorists. And from the very first day, and the same way you have people in the West echoing the conspiracy theories of the Kremlin about Ukraine, not only about what is happening now, but what happened on Euromaidan or what happened in 2004, conspiracy theories. The same way you have people in the West or in the Arab world or in other places who say, oh yes, there were no demonstrations in Syria, everything was staged, people were paid. I've been through many conflict zones. I know nobody who is ready to go and die in a protest because he has been paid for, I don't know, a sandwich or something. This never happened in history. This never happened. When you're ready to go and die in a collective protest, it's because you believe it. This is a universal truth. But Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin cannot accept this kind of truth. They cannot accept it because, as I told you, they inherited the power. They consider that the power is theirs. And so they consider that anybody that is protesting against this power is an existential threat, is an enemy that has to be crushed. And because of the conspiracy theories, they believe they are foreign agents. They are agents of CIA, Mossad. So they have to be treated like a military threat, a security threat, which is why immediately the military is being used against the very people who are protesting peacefully. So you see how important to understand this joint, this shared mindset between those leaders, because you can spend hours discussing with them, you will never convince them that people can genuinely go into the street protesting and be ready to be shot at for what they believe. They always see a conspiracy, they always see a plot. And because they always see a conspiracy, they always see a plot, then of course, they always react with an extreme violence because they consider that their fellow countrymen in Syria, that their neighbors in Ukraine cannot be treated on the same foot. They have to be treated as existential enemies. Terrorists in Syria and everything that you have been abused by the Russian propaganda in Ukraine. Is that, so this is the second point, so the legacy, and then the mindset of the alternative reality of the so-called security services or insecurity services. Is that, you have questions? Please, do have a question. Make my day. One question. Please, two. Please.
So you mentioned the occupation of Lebanon, and you said that it was the occupation not by Syria, but by the Syrian regime, by the government. We here in Ukraine, we prefer not to say that it is the war of Russian government against Ukraine, but it is a war of Russian people, Russians, against us, Ukrainians. So my question is it possible to build that parallel that we build between Putin and Bashar Assad, build the same parallel between two peoples, Russians and Syrians?
Well, I would do that. I would do that because I think one of the biggest gifts we can give to Putin is to consider him as a state leader. He's a regime leader, and I will mention it in the third and last point. He's the leader of a gang. So the more you amalgamate the people around him, the more you consider that he is Russia, he is embodying Russia, the more I think, with all due respect for you who are suffering directly from the Russian invasion, the more I think you make him stronger. So I think the distinction between the regime and the state, between the ruler and the people, is crucial. By the way, in Paris, and I don't want to go into details and into names or identities, but we have a special program for refugees. And some of them are Russian refugees, and they have been suffering from the Putin regime in a way that I couldn't even imagine before I exchange a little bit with them. So amalgamating them with the regime is, I think, a gift that you give to the regime. You make him stronger. Then when it comes to Lebanon, and your question is crucial because it proves, and it will make the transition also easier to my last point, because a regime is basically working for his own sake. It's a selfish entity that is trying to grab the largest chunk of power, money, resources in order for it to prosper. But the same regime is redistributing crumbs of this bounty to a part of the population that is therefore grateful to the regime, and therefore they are buying loyalty through nepotism, client patronage, crony capitalism, where you get. So Lebanon was a perfect example. The Syrian army proved after 2011, and we will see that in the following classes, that it was no match for people ready to go all the way for the revolution. But the Syrian army, I insist, the army, not the security, not the equivalent of Berkut, the army remained loyal to the Assad regime because they always hoped to be sent to Lebanon. And in Lebanon was then it was before the recent economic collapse. Lebanon was a very prosperous country. So they were racketeering everywhere. They were taking money from everybody. And I remember once I was talking to a teenager in Damascus, and I was asking, what is the dream of your life? I want to be an officer in Lebanon, which means that I will take a lot of money in my pocket. So was this teenager a fan of Assad? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think for the revolution, for the people who wanted to topple the regime, it was important to try and drag him on their own side. But certainly, if his ambition was to become an officer in order to racketeer people in Lebanon, then it would serve perfectly the Assad regime. Is my distinction clear? Yeah. Okay. Another question? No? So after somebody dare to jump into the water, nobody want to jump to it? Please, Maxime.
As I know, the Putin's regime is strongly based on the Soviet heritage, because Putin even says that the fall of Soviet Union was the biggest tragedy in his world. His policy in propaganda and etc. is very depends on the Soviet history. It can be seen in his view on Ukraine, Georgia, and etc. And especially the Soviet Union used to be a superpower, and that's why Putin's regime in his propaganda is trying to keep the status of superpower. But what is the point on Assad's regime? Yeah, is it trying to be a superpower in the region, or maybe it just protecting the safety of the region, or these 2 points are connected?
Oh, they are perfectly connected, and thank you for your question. Hafez al-Assad, so the late Syrian president, Bashar's father, was reported as saying that if it depended on him, he would have put Gorbachev in front of a firing squad. So again, as I told you, the Syrians say very brutally what the Russians cannot express. For them, perestroika was not only a disaster, it was a treason. And they considered that the betrayal of the Soviet regime and empire was the root cause of all their problems. In Russia, of course, but also in Syria, because you have to understand that Syria, and we'll come to that in the following classes, was receiving a tremendous amount of military support and financial support from the Soviet Union. And they never repaid one ruble. It was always for free, always for free. For example, in 1982, Soviet Union literally doubled the Syrian army, doubled the number of tanks, doubled the number of planes, which is something, of course, I wish to Ukraine very soon, but that's another topic. So at that time, Soviet Union was backing the regional ambition of Syria to be the main regional power. It was a time where Henry Kissinger was comparing Hafez al-Assad to Bismarck, the father of German unity, when Jimmy Carter was comparing to Saladin, the one who fought the Crusaders and regained Jerusalem. So that was the ambition. Yeah? And Lebanon was only part of the regional ambition. So of course, for them, the collapse of the Soviet Union meant also the collapse of the regional ambition of a greater Syria. So you see how it was connected. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Please.
Question. Russia has their ideology, and Putin's ideology mixed Soviet Union ideology, Russian Empire ideology. They have combined some narratives from other their periods of history, combined new ideology, what we talk cause of war, cause of common tragedy, and what about Syria? Which ideology they have? Which tragedy is for them their child?
Okay, the Baath party is the equivalent of the Communist Party in Russia. The Baath means resurgence. The motto of the Baath party was socialism, Arabism, unity, because they were claiming to achieve Arab unity. Every night you could see before the newsreel a green map of the Arab world from Morocco to the Gulf that should be united under the Baath regime. The same way the Communist Party had this global ambition. No? But the same way the global ambition of the Communist Party poorly hide a very concrete grabbing of power and resources, the same way the Ba'ath Party became, and that will be the transition to my third part, a mafia network. So the Syrians, instead of saying socialism, Arabism, unity, they say criminality, Arabism, unity, to design Shirakiya, Haramiya, you know, to designate the Ba'ath Party. And in fact, when you have also this inheritance, this legacy process, the ideology is lost on the way. Usually the new ruler, he goes through the rights, and you can see with Putin, but you know it better than me, of course, that in fact his speech, his vision of is very melting pot. He's mixing element of the church, of the party, and at the same time he says the Russian Revolution was a disaster. So the Russian Revolution was a disaster, and the collapse of the Soviet Union was a disaster. But that's not the problem. And same with Assad and anti-imperialism and so on and so forth. So the ideology is not crucial. What is crucial is the power and the way it is exerted. And it was the same, in fact, in Soviet Union, by the way. The KGB was much stronger than the party itself. And it was so strong that eventually the leader of the KGB, Andropov, became himself the leader of Soviet Union. Yeah? And it's the same with... so those regimes, the longer they remain, the less ideology matters, which is why they need an enemy. And I just described in the two first parts how the enemy matters. Yeah? Another question? Yes, please.
Well, Syria, they were once the United Arab Republic.
Yes, well, you know it well.
I wanted to understand this transition between the Arab Republic, which was led by Nasser, and the independence era, and what is then Ba'ath Party. So you say that it is in some way Communist Party. Was it so named, and then they changed it, or is it just a comparison?
No, it's just a comparison. In fact, the Ba'ath Party was founded by, like the Communist Party, by very talented intellectuals, most of them from a middle-class background, most of them studying in Paris, and it was very idealistic, like the Communist Party in the beginning. At the beginning, you would have said to Karl Marx or Engels, we'll have Gulag, they would have hallucinated. You know, there was nothing. So the Arabs, first, I am an Arabist, I love the Arab, but I don't know what is Arab socialism. I don't see why socialism has to be Arab. So they were mixing things about the Arab identity, secularism. But again, what is important is the power technique, the power struggle. And it was the same from Lenin to Stalin to Khrushchev and so on and so forth. And it was the same in Syria. So you rose a very crucial point. Syria became independent from France formally in 1943, really completely in 1946. But France, instead of cooperating with the local elite to make this country stronger after independence, undermined its independence and led the way to anti-system parties like the Communist Party, like the Ba'ath Party, to say all those people with their election, with their parliament, they are flawed. We will be stronger because we have no problem with elections. We will build, quote unquote, Arab socialism. But usually those people are very weak in the society. They speak loud, but they don't have strong power base before they come to power. When they are in power, they can build power. It was the same with Lenin in 1917. You know, Communist Party was only and the Bolsheviks were only a very little minority. So it was the same. So what the Ba'athists did is that they pushed for the union with Egypt, for the so-called United Arab Republic in 1958. But under the motto of Arab socialism, it was in fact an Egyptian occupation of Syria. So it was resented by the local population, and it collapsed in 1961. Except during that period, Syria dropped its independence flag. The independence flag has 3 stars for Damascus, Aleppo, and any city in Syria that would like to join the fight against France. During the union, or so-called union, what I called occupation by Egypt, it had only 2 stars, Syria and Egypt. And the Ba'ath party kept the 2 stars. And because they had to give way to elections, they managed 2 years after to make a military coup, to topple the democratic and parliamentary institution. And from then on, 1963, it was the Ba'ath party ruling Syria with the 2 stars flag. You don't have many countries in the world whose flag is denying the sovereignty of its own nation. The Ba'athists chose this kind of flag. Yeah? And they went on with it. So 1963, it was the collective Ba'ath, and then after 5 or 6 internal coups, Assad rose to absolute power after Assad in 1970 and transferred this absolute power to Bashar al-Assad. Is that? So now I will move to my last point, which is the point about the mafia system. And the mafia system is, in fact, I will be quicker because we are reaching our time. But the mafia system, you know, when you're talking about mafia system, it's not an hazard. You know, this is really deeply embedded into the logic I described of inheritance. If you inherit a country, a territory, the national resources. For Putin, the national resources are his. For Assad, the national resources are his. And he's generous enough to give it back, some of it, to his fellow countrymen and countrywomen. So you have this patrimonial approach that, of course, through the security networks, leads to the plundering of the country and the need to have resources that are autonomous from the society, who are not produced by the work of the women and men, so you can depend on those resources in order for them to be absorbed by the regime directly. So in Russia, obviously, it's oil and other natural resources, but oil is the key, which is why, and we will discuss it in the last class. Now the dialogue that, in fact, the partnership between Russia and Saudi Arabia on the oil market is absolutely central. But in Syria, most of the resources we are talking about are imported. They're imported for free. It is Russian support, it is Iranian support that we will discuss next week. And all this is coming to support the regime. Officially, you know, the friendship of the people, the alliance of the people, all this, you know, is, this is sheer propaganda. The reality is that you cannot know exactly what is the money involved. Again, in Syria, it's more explicit than in Russia. in Syria, you have two state secrets, the military budget and the oil resources. That's perfect. So you can divert all the money you want, because nobody knows even the amount of the money involved. Same in Russia, with less explicit, but de facto, you have black holes. So those black holes are not anomalies. They are at the very center of those systems. They are feeding on the black holes, and they don't want anybody to touch these black holes, because this is part of what is really founding their absolute power. But in order, Putin or Assad, they cannot do everything by themselves. So they need to have partners. And one can really make the analogy with organized crime. I wrote a book called Generals, Gangsters, and Jihadis. And the way they deal with this dark economy, underground economy. But when you say dark or underground, in fact, this is central for them. So you have to understand that first, they consider that they inherited the country, not just the power. Second, that they live in an alternative reality, that they cannot accept any challenge, and they will treat it as an existential threat. And third, that they rule a mafia system, because what is called the oligarchs, not only in Russia, is in fact, well, this could be an oligarch room. I'll just give you but that means that it's not like the usual vision, the idea of a syndicate, that you have the president, the secretary general, and the mafia. No, in fact, people are moving in and out. They can be part of the inner circle when it comes to oil, and they will be out when it comes to weapons. And others will come in. Others will come when it comes to financial laundering. Others will come in Syria, at least when it comes to drugs. So this gives the possibility for Vladimir Assad and Bashar Putin to have a permanent balance where they are the only one who calls the shots. They are the only one who can say you're in or you're out. Your share will be up or your share will be down, or you will be excluded, and so on and so forth. It's a very dangerous game, which of course makes those leaders more and more ruthless, because they are literally ruling a pack of wolves, and very hungry and sometimes mad wolves. Somebody like Kadyrov can only be controlled by Putin. Nobody else in Russia can control Kadyrov because of all his excesses. And they all have their Kadyrovs. Kadyrov, again, is not an anomaly. They need somebody as extreme as Kadyrov in his greed, in his repression, in his violence, in order to check the others. Same with Wagner and his group. Same with other networks. So in Syria, they could be connected with the intelligence patrons. They could be connected with people who are laundering Assad dirty money outside. They could be connected with Asma al-Assad. Asma al-Assad is Bashar al-Assad's wife. And she was presented as the epitome of modernism, because she had studied in the UK at London School of Economics. So again, because I know too well the system, when she went, when she became the first lady, I say, now they will computerize the racketeering. Before, racketeering was just, and it just happened. Now they have a ration card system in Syria with smart cards. So everybody in the UN agency say, how wonderful, so now we can know, we can track this. On each smart card, Mrs. al-Assad is taking her share. Each rice bag, each floor distribution, each, it's just a new development. Those people have an incredible imagination. They could make money out of anything because they are living on that, because they need this money, first for their own consumption, because they are very greedy, but because they need to butter always those power networks. This is the way it worked. So you have this, now in Syria, the sanctions in Syria are far more severe than the one on Russia. But the regime is keeping afloat. Why? And again, I know the Assads in general, I know the way they work, I know the way they deal for years, now for decades. But I'm always surprised by how they can manage to find new resources. And now they find a new resource, so I put it in the additional resources of your syllabus if you're interested, which is a synthetic drug called captagon. Well, I hope you never meet any kind of captagon. Captagon is an amphetamine that can be manufactured very cheaply. And Syria had, before the war, before the catastrophe, a very good pharmaceutical industry. So they have the chemists, they have the chemistry expertise. So when you have the chemistry expertise, the only thing you need is a military power, militia, army, to protect the facilities where you produce the drug and to escort the convoys to the borders to export the drugs. You have it in Syria. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is not the only son of the late Hafez. His brother is named Maher, and Maher al-Assad is the leader of the presidential guard and of the shock troops, of the only thing practically left of the Syrian army. And his main duty now is to protect the production of captagon and to escort the convoys to the borders and possibly to ensure that the drug is delivered. The final destination is very often Saudi Arabia, where this drug became very popular because alcohol is banned and it's just a pill you can take, so it's very easy to have it. So it's impossible to know precisely how much money they make out of it, but the estimates run into billions of euro, billions of dollars. So thanks to that, and that pretty recent, it's started to run full speed only 2-3 years ago. Thanks to that, the Assad regime is largely immune to the sanction. The same way, the Russian regime, Putin, is trying to secure the oil resources through the partnership with Saudi Arabia, which brings us to the Middle East, and how the Middle East matters to Ukraine, and to secure it in order to be sure that nobody will interfere with it. And one last thing, and maybe I will conclude on that while opening the floor to the last question, and you will see that even though I'm French, I kept the schedule because it would be 1 hour 20. Sorry. So you see that in order to generate this kind of extreme profits, war is not a calamity. It can be an opportunity. War economy is generating far bigger profits than peace economy. Peace economy is rational from the point of view of a rational development of human societies. That means empowerment of the various sections of a population through democratic means. Peace economy brings prosperity to the whole society. War always creates a class of profiteers, and those profiteers in the Putin and the Assad regime are closely connected with the top. So war for them, including the war that was launched against your country, is not a calamity, it's an opportunity. And then generate, of course, they plunder your country, and you saw the images of the fridges being taken away, and also the way they were given free rein. They liberated people from jail in order to launch them on your cities. You know all that. You know that. But that's only the foam. The reality, the dialectic behind it is that the way that war is an opportunity for this kind of regime, which is why they are so comfortable with war. And Putin came to power through the second war in Chechnya, and the second war in Chechnya really generated corruption networks that are still active today, not only Kadyrov, but others. And they also, but I just mentioned that, I will elaborate on that in the next classes. They facilitate the connection, the underworld connection between the official underworld of the security and the criminal underworld. You saw that in Euromaidan with Titushki, you say that? Titushki. You have the same in Syria, they are called the Shabiha, the phantoms. And the phantoms are in fact gangsters, who are closely connected with the security apparatus, the repressive apparatus. So I'm reaching the end of this first class. I thank you very much, not only for being here, whether online or here in this room, but also for your very kind attention. But again, if you have questions, whether on this last part or for the rest of the class, I would be happy to answer them if it is your choice.
Okay. So you told us about this interesting analogy and how they live by the war. But how do you think, what are the possible solutions for preventing these regimes to appear?
Well, I will sound my age to you because I'm 61, but rule of law, whether the sovereignty of law in one country or the rule of international law, is always the best way to neutralize the ferocity, the aggressivity, the hostility of this regime. I know it's easier said than done, but this is why also I always stand against the so-called real politicians who say, oh, we have to be soft with the tough ones because we have to be realist. I think being realist is being tough with the tough ones, not soft. Because since they are tough, we have to prove them that we are not afraid of them, that we can deter them. I know, again, it's easier said than done, but with my little experience, I started when I was your age. I was a delegate for the International Federation of Human Rights in Lebanon in the middle of a war. And the only weapon I had was the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights in my pocket in a little blue book. And people were saying me, but if you enter here, you will never get out. I see. I always got out. Sometimes I got very scared, and sometimes I got out with the prisoners, maybe 2, maybe 3. So at the end of the day, ethical issues have to be always on the front, but as the late US President Theodore Roosevelt told it very vividly, speak soft, but with a very big stick. And a very big stick is a precondition for the possibility of speaking soft and the opportunity of being heard. Are you sure? No? Maybe you will think about it. I will send you my email if you want to ask other questions. And, okay. Thank you so much, dear Tatiana. So as you see, on arrive à la fin. Voilà, voilà. Merci. So, duże dziękuję. Okay. Thank you so much.